Hello, all you beautiful people, and welcome to The Wire. Republicans are starting to not trust higher education, and that's a problem for liberal academics, according to the Los Angeles Times. It's been known for quite some time now about the indoctrination that goes on at some of these places if the students are not aware and alert to be on the lookout. Only 36% of Republicans, according to the Pew Research Center, believe colleges and universities have a positive effect on the way things are going in the country, versus 58% who say they have a negative effect. Among Democrats, those figures are 72% and 19% respectively. That finding represents a crisis. For it to be a crisis does not depend on you having any conservative sympathies. For this to be a crisis requires only that you recognize that the GOP is one of two major political parties in American life, and that Republicans' lack of faith in higher education will have practical consequences. Further, it helps if you recognize that in the present era, Republicans dominate American governance with control of the House, Senate, presidency, and crucially, for our purposes, a significant majority of the country's state houses and governors and mansions. They also have built a machine for state-level political elections that ensures that they will likely control many state legislators for years to come. Here's a direct quote from the author. "In my network of professional academics, almost no one recognizes that our lopsided liberalism presents a threat to academia itself. It's become just like the media. It's entirely one-sided." The numbers, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but we did a report on the bubble, that is the media bubble. And in 2013, it was like 7%, I believe, of journalists were Republicans. And that number's even gone down from that now. And there are two main centers, of course, which is New York and California, for journalism. What about the other states, the flyover country, that no one seems to care about? Well, a similar bubble is brewing with education. And a part of this problem that we keep seeing in our culture and society today is because of this lopsided, one-sided ideology. It's a totalitarian system based on a one-sided ideology. And that's playing a major role in society today. It's really common sense if you think about it, because the people who are graduating or who are going to these schools are coming out liberal or coming out one-sided. And to them, an opposing view is incorrect or false, or it's fake. You see what they've created by doing this one-sided narrative in both media and education? It's astonishing how fast this actually happened. And this crisis is just going to keep growing and growing and growing unless there are opposing views that are not just automatically deemed fake, allowed into the sphere of talking, of communication, of education, and media. Officially weird. Mysterious signals from dwarf star, not signs of alien life. Strange signals emanating from a dwarf star are not evidence of extraterrestrial life. That's according to astronomers who detected the unidentified radio signals, setting off public speculation that aliens were trying to make contact with Earth. Scientists from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico revealed last week that they were baffled by signals detected on May 12th emanating from the star Ross 128. Moving on. A leading psychiatrist, support of transgenderism and sex change surgery, is collaborating with madness. We have wasted scientific and technical resources and damaged our professional credibility by collaborating with madness rather than trying to study, cure, and ultimately prevent it, said Dr. McHugh. A leading psychiatrist at John Hopkins University claims that supporting transgenderism and sex change therapy is collaborating with madness, and that doing such is enabling mental illness to run rampant. Dr. Paul R. McHugh is a leading service psychiatrist at John Hopkins University, a former psychiatrist-in-chief at John Hopkins Hospital, and an author. Dr. McHugh explains. In his book, The Mind Has Mountains, Reflections on Society and Psychiatry, in chapter Surgical Sex, that transgender is a mental illness, and to perform sex change therapy for transgenders is enabling mental illness. I have witnessed to a great deal of damage from sex reassignment, states Dr. McHugh in his book. The children transformed from their male constitution into female roles suffered prolonged distress and misery as they sensed their natural attitudes as males develop. As for the adults who came to us at John Hopkins Hospital claiming to have discovered their true sexual identity and to have heard about sex change operations, we psychiatrists have been distracted from studying the causes and natures of their mental misdirections by preparing them for surgery and for a life in the other sex, he said. We have wasted scientific and technical resources and damaged our professional credibility by collaborating with madness rather than trying to study, cure, and ultimately prevent it, said Dr. McHugh. John Hopkins Hospital at one time performed sex reassignment surgeries during the 1970s. But after further psychiatric review, the doctors at the hospital concluded that Hopkins was fundamentally cooperating with a mental illness. Dr. McHugh was psychiatrist-in-chief at John Hopkins Hospital in 1975 through 2001. We psychiatrists, I thought, would do better to concentrate on trying to fix their minds and not their genitalia, he said. Dr. McHugh further stated in regards to those who are proponents of transgenderism, one might expect that those who claim that sexual identity has no biological or physical basis would bring forth more evidence to persuade others, said Dr. McHugh. But as I've learned, there is a deep prejudice in favor of the idea that nature is totally malleable. Dr. McHugh, like many others who have spoken out in regards to the mental disorder of transgenderism, are silent voices to the ever-increasing pressure placed on society by the mainstream views that offer only disdain to support their claims of tolerance and acceptance. Culture is the biggest proponent of transgenderism, and the culture that is being forced on the next generation will have dire consequences for the minds of the youth caused by the confusion. The culture being thrust upon American society today is not without warrant. In fact, it in and of itself is a form of ideological subversion, specifically demoralization. At least that is according to Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent of the Soviet Union. Now, wait a minute. We got more to go through here. The Satanic Temple founder says that over half of the members could be LGBTQ. The co-founder of the Satanic Temple said that he would not be surprised if over half of the group's members identify as LGBTQ because of its radically inclusive space. So the people who are pushing this are in large part Satanists, openly practicing Satanists. That's a bit interesting, isn't it? We don't have strict separations or definitions of our gay membership, our trans membership, or anybody else. Lucian Greaves said in an article for Vice published on Monday. Still, Greaves offered that he wouldn't be surprised if more than half identify as such. Vice described the Satanic Temple as a platform for LGBTQ members to celebrate their identities and suggested that they are drawn by the radically inclusive space for people who identify in all sorts of ways. Greaves explained in previous interviews that the Satanic Temple's members do not believe in Satan and God as literal beings, but view Satan as a metaphorical construct of rebellion. That's rather interesting given their practices of rituals. You see, you typically do rituals to a deity, and that's exactly what the Satanic Temple is involved with. It's not metaphorical. You're not fooling us. We're not stupid. But I'll tell you what's happening, folks. I'll tell you what's happening. We have a serious crisis going on in schools. And I know we just discussed earlier about the higher education. But in Minnesota, it's a lot more lopsided. Minnesota Department of Education to segregate children that oppose transgender bathroom policies. Yes, you heard that correctly. A recently approved Minnesota Department of Education toolkit instructs schools to segregate and isolate students who disagree or are concerned with sharing a restroom or locker room with a transgender student. Last Wednesday, the Minnesota DOE approved a new toolkit for schools called Safe and Supportive Schools for Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Students. The toolkit describes how to deal with students who object to the new policies. The following is from the toolkit, page 10. Privacy objections raised by a student in interacting with a transgender or gender nonconforming student may be addressed by segregating the student raising the objection, provided that the action of the school officials does not result in stigmatizing the transgender and gender nonconforming student. I mean, literally, we're talking less than 1% of the population. And if they disagree, if a normal person disagrees with the mental illness, they're going to be segregated. You've got to be kidding me. Any student who wishes not to share a restroom with a transgender or gender nonconforming student can be provided a private space, such as a single-user restroom. Why can't the transgender and nonconforming students use the private restroom, single-user restroom? Why does everybody else have to accept this? Coaches should consider how they can utilize privacy curtains, restrooms, and separate changing schedules to provide for privacy of all students. At times, any student may have specific needs for privacy, and the school makes arrangements based on that student's. Segregation, in and of itself, is peer pressure upon a student who disagrees with the transgender student. The school system is practically forcing segregation onto students who disagree with the acceptance of a mentally ill child. You just heard a leading psychiatrist say it's a mental illness at John Hopkins University, who's been practicing for over 40 years. There are several other psychiatrists and psychologists who agree that it's a mental illness. And what society is doing is pushing this mental illness onto more children. But hang on, there's more. There is nothing in the toolkit that even addresses the probability of a young, curious male student claiming to be a female based on maligned ideas, entering the girls' locker room and harassing the girls. To make matters even worse, if a female has a problem with being stared at by a very inappropriate male student, if a female has a problem with the above scenario, she is segregated. This is horrific. But that's not all. Teachers, be warned. If you use the incorrect pronoun or incorrect name of a transgender student, you could be violating federal law. Sound familiar? Canada just passed that if anyone incorrectly uses a pronoun or a name or whatever the hell have you, they can be thrown in jail for a hate crime. But here it begins with teachers. Here it begins in the school in the U.S. Here it's going to take a few years to get this all the way through now, isn't it? Now, we've seen the agenda from the very beginning in 1971, and of course it was way before that, but I'm just saying the document that's been widely published in 1971 that basically aligns technology and this transgender ideology or the transgender agenda. The toolkit continues, however. In an effort for inclusivity, schools may wish to consider revisiting existing traditions or establishing new traditions, the kit states. For example, instead of electing a homecoming king and homecoming queen, some schools have chosen to nominate prom ambassadors, homecoming court, or homecoming royalty. At the University of Minnesota, for example, the titles of homecoming king and queen have been replaced with the title homecoming royalty, and students selected as royalty will now be called royals. You got to really wonder what and who is sitting behind all of this, creating these toolkits. However, according to John Helmberger, CEO of the Minnesota Family Council, now this is good news, the toolkit will most likely be dismissed because not once did the document address the concerns of the majority of students or the concerns of gender-conforming students and parents. Regardless of the probable dismissal, the toolkit lays bare the agenda. Accept it or be segregated from society. At what point did a mental illness begin to define the whole of American culture? That's the real question behind it all. But again, we see it now in the Trump administration. Trump's new communication director tweeted support for abortion and gay marriage. Now, this is on a little bit different of a note, but of course we saw how it started: homosexuality, transgenderism, and of course, eventually they're going to get to pedophilia. I mean, my goodness, have you seen the grown men dressed in cross-dressers who are sitting with little children in libraries all across the country? And that's okay, and I cannot believe that parents are actually walking their children to it. Now, of course, with the Trump administration, we have Scaramucci, who previously has tweeted support of gay marriage and support of abortion, but you know what? He's deleted them now, and apparently his views have all changed. He's just now going to serve the president's agenda. That's pretty interesting given the reality that viewpoints like those typically don't change. So it's just got to make you wonder exactly what is his real agenda? What are his real values? Because somebody who just keeps switching back and forth to, for public appeal, it's got to make you wonder what the underlying motive and what the underlying agenda is. Armed Chinese jets drive off U.S. spy plane over the Yellow Sea. A U.S. spy plane flying near the eastern coast of China was intercepted by 2 Chinese fighter jets and had to change course, U.S. officials said. The surveillance aircraft was flying over international waters between China and South Korea. The incident took place on Sunday, unnamed U.S. officials told reporters on Monday. An EP-3 Ares Signals intelligence plane was flying about 90 miles south of the port city Qingdao when it was approached by 2 J-10 interceptors armed with air-to-air missiles. One of the Chinese jets flew under the EP-3 and popped up 300 feet or 90 meters in front of the U.S. plane, causing the crew to take evasive action to avoid collision, according to one official. The U.S. Navy described the flight as a routine mission operating in accordance with international law up until the interaction between the spy plane and the Chinese interceptors. While we are still investigating the incident, initial reports from the U.S. air crew characterized the intercept as unsafe, said Lieutenant Commander Matt Knight, Pacific Fleet spokesman. The issue is being addressed with China through appropriate diplomatic and military channels. The time has come to expect these sort of interactions quite often. Because according to a U.S. general, Russia is no longer the single biggest threat to the United States. North Korea, Iran, and China are among the top concerns. The chairman of the United States Chief of Staff no longer considers Russia America's greatest threat. Rather, North Korea, Iran, and China are among the top concerns of the United States. 2 years ago, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, considered Russia to be the greatest threat to America. But now other actors are threatening U.S. national security, with North Korea now consulting the #1 challenge. Now, here is his actual words on it. I said at the time, from a state actor perspective, it's Russia. And I said that's because of their nuclear capability and their cyber capabilities, Dunford said at a recent security forum in Aspen, Colorado. However, he said the U.S. military does not actually have the luxury today of singling out one challenge. I just want to put it into context. If I was to say Russia is the greatest threat, it is one of the threats that we face right now, and the one that is most militarily capable, Dunford said. Obviously, North Korea today, from a sense of urgency perspective, would be our #1 challenge, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said. When I look at Russia, first and foremost, we have to be able to deter a nuclear war. Secondly, we have to be able to deter a conventional war, he said. The de-escalation of the Russian crisis and the escalation of tensions with China, North Korea, and Iran further provides evidence that while America fixated on the former Soviet Union and fighting terrorism in the Middle East, other countries crept up to challenge the U.S. As the crisis in North Korea deepens, the general pointed out that military action with the rogue nation is no longer unimaginable. Rather, Dunford warned that the nuclear program is an urgent threat. Many people have talked about military options with words like unimaginable. This is his quote again. I would probably shift that slightly and say it would be horrific. And it would be a loss of life unlike any we have experienced in our lifetimes. And I mean anyone who's been alive since World War II has never seen the loss of life that could occur if there's a conflict on the Korean Peninsula. But as I've told my counterparts, both friend and foe, it is not unimaginable to have military options to respond to North Korean nuclear capability. What's unimaginable to me is allowing a capability that would allow a nuclear weapon to land in Denver, Colorado. That's unimaginable to me. So my job will be to develop military options to make sure that doesn't happen. The general's comments, just as the State Department are also is preparing to issue a travel ban to North Korea for American citizens, which could be a signal that military action is on the horizon. However, only time will tell. The North Korean crisis also could lead back to a different crisis or a further crisis with Iran, Russia, and or China, as all of the countries are linked in some way. For example, Russia wiped away 90% of North Korean debt in 2014 because Russia was eyeing a pipeline in the region. China, on the other hand, is North Korea's largest trading partner. In other words, North Korea is China's bulldog. Iran and North Korea partake in educational, scientific, and cultural cooperation, as well as cooperating in the nuclear program of Iran. This whole thing is a massive crisis that is all interlinked. Who is going to come to the aid of North Korea when the U.S. comes knocking? That's the real question. But back on the home front, a Wisconsin company, 328 M. To offer RFID microchips to employees, paving the way towards the mark of the beast. A Wisconsin company is aiming to be the first corporation in the U.S. to offer microchip implants to its employees. The company 32M designs software for break room markets that are commonly found in office complexes. 3M boasts that they have markets in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. According to 3 Market Chief Executive Officer Todd Westby, the company has technology that allows people to purchase snack items from vending machines straight from their cell phones already. But now Westby wants to expand that to implantable microchips. Starting on August 1st, 2017, over 50 employees of the Wisconsin-based company are opting in to have the microchip implanted under their skin. We'll come up, scan the item, he explained, while showing how the process will work at an actual break room market kiosk. We'll hit pay with a credit card, and it's asking to swipe my proximity payment now. I'll hold my hand up just like my cell phone, and it'll pay for my product. In other words, they're taking the, first of all, they replaced the credit card with the cell phone. And now they're replacing the cell phone card. Now, obviously, there's no card, but you know what I mean, the frequency with the RFID chip, which then gets scanned instead of the card or instead of the phone. Now, in addition to being able to purchase with the microchip, employees that opted in can open doors with the implant and log into their computers. Each RFID chip costs roughly $300, and 32M will pay for its employees to undergo the process of obtaining them. No one, this is very important, no one at 32M is required to get the microchip, and there is no additional GPS tracking of the radio frequency produced by the implant, according to Westby. Now, just a second here. In short distances, radio frequencies can be tracked, like GPS. Similar, but not near the scale. According to Scripture, the RFID implants are actively paving the way towards the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17. And he made all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. What makes the current RFID chip not the actual mark of the beast? It can be taken out, and it's not being forced. However, RFID microchips are a direct resemblance of what is mentioned in Revelation chapter 13, verse 17, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Being that in our current world, no one is forced to obtain a microchip to make purchases or sell products, currently the rice grain technology is not the actual mark of the beast mentioned in Scripture. Again, however, it is a direct resemblance of what is rapidly coming down the road. Culture and society first have to accept the technology that replaces the debit card, which could be a version of the microchip, and then after such takes place, the mark of the beast could come about. What is taking place right now is the beginning throes of the technology that can and probably will replace the credit/debit card. In 2007, NBC posted a video which mentioned that by the end of 2017, everyone could have an implantable RFID chip. It's 2017, and not everyone, in fact almost no one, has an implantable chip, which goes to show that the replacement technology does, in fact, take time to come about. However, with technology, that timeline is exponential, meaning that with every single development of technology, the time between upgrades gets smaller and smaller until, of course, the end goal is accomplished. For example, the RFID chip has come about, just not under your skin. Instead, it's on your debit card. The EMV chip is actively being rolled out from banks all across the US and around the world. What in the world is an EMV chip? EMV is a technical standard for smart payment cards and for payment terminals and automated teller machines that can accept them. EMV cards are smart cards, also called chip cards or IC cards, that store their data on integrated circuits in addition to magnetic strips for backward compatibility. These include cards that must be physically inserted or dipped into a reader and contactless cards that can be read over a short distance using radio frequency identification or RFID technology. Payment cards that comply with the EMV standard are often called chip and PIN or chip and signature cards, depending on the authentication methods employed by the card issuer. The EMV is a, quote, version of the RFID microchip. And now it's not a direct version, but I called it a version because we're speaking of something specific here, the RFID technology, suggesting that after the successful adoption of the EMV chip, implantable technology could begin. No longer would purchasers need to carry a card. Instead, they could just implant the card or circuitry under their skin and carry it with them at all times. Inevitably, banks, grocers, malls, and virtually all places of business could require such technology to complete purchases. Thus, the environment for the mark of the beast could come about as Scripture correctly states. Either way, be safe and don't implant the RFID chip. Scripture's clear. This company is playing a large role in fomenting this technology. This technology will foment the mark of the beast. They're going almost like a timeline, and it's crazy to see. And you better believe it, this guy's Facebook page, or his company Facebook page, has been blown up with Scripture. And it's beautiful. Because hopefully, they won't do it. Because it begins on August 1st. Brussels is preparing to retaliate against U.S. sanctions imposed on Russia. You did hear that correctly. Brussels is preparing to retaliate against U.S. sanctions imposed on Russia. The rise of the European superstate. The U.S. at the weekend approved new sanctions against Russia for playing a role in the 2016 elections. However, the penalties proposed also affect the European Union. Jean-Claude, the European Commission president, called for a review of the sanctions and requested that they prepare a response to the U.S. should the supposedly far-reaching sanctions greatly affect the EU. According to a note prepared for a commission meeting on Wednesday and seen by the Financial Times, Brussels should stand ready to act within days if the U.S. measures were adopted without EU concerns being taken into account. U.S. lawmakers reached an agreement at the weekend for sweeping new sanctions to be levied against Russia as Washington seeks to punish Moscow for its reported meddling in last year's election. The House is expected to vote on Tuesday on the legislation, which will be imposed not just on Russia but also on Iran and North Korea. An earlier version of the bill was passed in the House by a vote of 97-2 in June. However, that legislation concerned only Moscow and Tehran, forcing legislators to postpone the bill's passage as they negotiated the additional sanctions for Pyongyang. If the White House does approve the proposed sanctions, U.S. relations with the EU could change, and such could lead to the also proposed European superstate. You guys remember this from last year? Last year, Germany and France signed a secret document that further paved the way towards creating a European superstate, one that does not require U.S. aid. The countries in the superstate would not be allowed to have their army or special services. The ES, or that's short, would bring about a unified law and taxation system and abolish the member countries' central bank and currency. They would then bring about their visa administration and enact a common foreign policy with other organizations and countries. Finally, the member states would have their role within NATO limited. In essence, if the U.S. sanctions deter U.S. and EU relations further, the need for the EU to become more self-resilient grows, and thus was cited in the reasoning for abolishing the EU and crafting the European superstate. In the West, it's America. In the Far East, it's Russia and China. Is there room for another contender? You tell me. In a breakthrough, archaeologists find clues in search for Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant. Archaeologists at a site in Israel's West Bank say the success of their search for the Ark of the Covenant looks promising. According to the Christian Post, the archaeologists are searching for the ancient Ark of the Covenant at Shiloh. Their search has turned up clues that are helping them determine whether they are in the right location to uncover the Ark. Shiloh is mentioned in the Bible as the site where the tabernacle, with the Ark placed inside in the Holy of Holies, was located. An article in the Times of Israel notes that the discoveries archaeologists have made thus far are already encouraging, but are yet not remotely definitive. Archaeologists have already uncovered objects that are believed to have been displayed in the ancient Israelite tabernacle. These objects include pottery jugs and a goblet used in worship. Scott Stripling, who leads an archaeological team at the Shiloh site, said that his team believes in the truth of Scripture and that the Bible is an accurate historical document. There are some who say the Bible is unreliable. We have found it to be very reliable. We're taking the Bible as a serious historical document. And guess what's happening? They're making discoveries. A sense of awe came upon me as I contemplated how God had set before us an open door at Shiloh, which will have a direct impact on how people read their Bibles in the future, he continued. What an awesome opportunity to get to go discover such things. In other words, to rediscover the mysteries of Scripture. But that's not all, folks. You notice how he's having tremendous success in taking the Bible literally, word for word. This took place here. This is where things were, so on and so forth. And things are turning up. That right there proves a lot. Yet we're not going to see this in mainstream science. Because their whole mission is to deny biblical truth. Time and time again, they are replacing biblical truth with scientific man-made theories over and over and over again. And each one of those theories has bias and an agenda intertwined in it. That's all the information I've got for you guys right now. I want to thank you all for watching and listening. Support the Christian Truther. Go to christiantruther.com/support. God bless and carry on. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Make sure you download our free mobile apps available on Apple and Android.